Welcome, friends, to another exciting episode of A VGM Journey. And I'm your host, The Messenger. The track that we're playing in today's show is Pulse Towards Tomorrow from the game The Legend of Heroes Trails of Cold Steel, and that track was composed by Yukihiro Jindo. On this week's show, I have a very special guest here with me. He's been a long-time VGM podcasting listener, and he's a pretty good friend of mine. Please give a warm welcome to Chris Murray. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Hey, thanks, man. Thanks for having me.
I guess everyone's wondering what this show is going to be about today, so do you want to tell everyone what we're going to be talking about?
Sure. I think anyone who has interacted with me on Discord or any other social media will know I'm a huge JRPG and Trails of Cold Steel fan, so I'm super excited to share some of what I think are the best tracks from the Trails of Cold Steel series with you and your listeners.
Sound pretty good. I was pretty excited about getting this show together, and I know that you've been requesting all kinds of different tracks for me, and I always felt bad about not really knowing what to talk about them. So I definitely had to have you on the show to talk about Trails of Cold Steel.
Yeah, it's a huge series that's part of a even larger series called the Legend of Heroes. So it can be a little bit overwhelming to dive into, knowing it's 4 games that's in the middle of multiple other series. But I can tell you, it is worth the ride and has some fantastic music along the way.
That was the pretty crazy part when I did just a little teeny bit of research, just kind of dipped my toes into it, and I did notice that it was a subseries of a bigger franchise.
Yeah, the Legend of Heroes has been around forever, and then this is part of the Trails series, which has Trails in the Sky, which has 3 games. There's a set of games that are called the Crossbelt Arc, which is a country in the continent of Erebonia where that all takes place. Then there's the Trails of Cold Steel series, and then they just released effectively a sequel to Trails of Cold Steel, which is also effectively an epilogue of this series and the Crossbelt Arc. So there's a lot of games and a ton of lore.
Oh boy, that is a lot to take in. I guess if you're a big RPG fan, I mean, there is a lot to digest.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for anyone who is, a fan of JRPGs and turn-based battle systems, these games will feel right at home. I do think the only thing I've said to folks through time is you have to want to engage with the world building and the character development, and it's a ton of dialogue. But again, that for me is my sort of sweet spot. I love deep character development. I love the relationship building. I love all of the aspects of how much work they put into truly building out the world and the lore and the history. So again, the sort of the action and the battles and all that kind of stuff is great, but the story is really where it shines.
I mean, that does sound like those are the ingredients to a really good RPG. You have a good battle system, great story, characters that you care about. It all goes together in a nice package.
Yeah, for sure. And it certainly builds on itself. I'm sure we'll talk about this as we go, right? But, it is definitely one story. It flows really well. The battle system doesn't change too much except for adding a few features and things, but for all intents and purposes, it's like, straight old school turn-based, buffs, statuses, all that kind of stuff.
I guess before we move on to your next track, I do want to say that the intro track that we're playing in the show, Pulse Towards Tomorrow, that's going to be the only track that we're going to play from the first Trails of Cold Steel. So I just want to know, why did you pick that track?
Yeah, I mean, it is. So it's the opening FMV intro to the game. I felt like if you're going to do the series, you got to start with the intro. The first game really sets the tone I'll stay out of spoiler territory, but the main character and the party are students at a military academy, and the first game, like, it's very clear you're students. You're in school, you're actually taking exams, you're doing field exercises, you're learning as you go, and it has this sort of like, epic adventure. We're learning as we go, but we're still teenagers, and the world is new to us kind of vibe. And so that I felt like Pulse Towards Tomorrow captures that sort of like, we're going on an epic adventure and we have a naivete about the world and we'll see what happens. And then the games just really pivot from there. But the like student theme happens throughout the series, but it's really the only Trails of Cold Steel 1 where it's like front and center and your party is like clearly all in school and students. So anyway, that's why I picked that one.
Yeah, I definitely get that anime intro vibe from that track. And I actually, just watching the video for it on YouTube, I thought that intro looked really nice.
Yeah, there's, I think on the OST there's also a no vocals version of the track, but it just works so well. It definitely feels like an anime. They actually are in the process of making this an anime, which I am like really excited about, although I just really hope they do it well. So we'll see.
Well, it sounds like they already got a good starting point with the music.
Yeah, for sure. And it lends itself well to that because, again, it's character driven. There's so much lore. There's so much story. So, again, hopefully that will be just another really great piece of the Legend of Heroes story overall.
You ready to move on and talk about the next track?
I'm ready.
All right. I guess up next, we're playing something from Trails of Cold Steel 2. The track is Heated Mine, and it was composed by Takahiro Unisuga. Track that you guys just listened to, that was Heated Mine from Trails of Cold Steel 2, and that was composed by Takahiro Unisuga. I gotta say, Chris, I really like that track.
Yeah, it's fantastic, and it's basically the initial battle theme for Trails of Cold Steel 2, and you could immediately get the vibe that you are not in school anymore, and like the world is very different. You are on a totally different adventure. Trails of Cold Steel 1 ends and Trails of Cold Steel 2 starts the same second right after, and so there's literally no downtime. Your characters start on like level 30 or 50, I can't remember which one, And so if you're playing them sort of back to back, it will feel like it's just the next chapter of literally the same game. And I think this track really helps to sort of set the stage of, things got real serious real fast, and it's time to go.
Yeah, I definitely got the battle music vibe from that track. So I didn't want to assume that it was battle music, but I guess it was pretty obvious that it was battle music.
Yeah, I tried not to pick all the battle themes, although we do have a lot of battle themes. But there's a ton of music here. But again, in my opinion, and for what I spend time listening to from Falcom, it's a lot of these sweeping guitars and strings and tons of energy and all that kind of stuff. I mean, they are also fantastic at a town theme and a shop theme and this moment and that moment. But what brings me back when I'm at work or when I just need to jam out in my car are tracks like this.
Well, they absolutely have to nail these battle tracks because, I mean, you're going to be listening to it dozens and dozens of times. So it does have to stick with you, and it's got to be good the first time that you listen to it and, like, the 100th time that you listen to it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, they're all, 70 to 90 hour RPGs, and it's not random encounters, but it's sort of like Chrono Trigger where you see the enemies and then you engage them, but then you go into a battle.
Oh, okay.
And so you're definitely hearing it hundreds of times by the end of this game.
I don't know about you, but I actually do prefer that kind of system when it comes to, I guess, enemy encounters. Because I don't know. The random encounters, I don't know. Sometimes I think it's a bit much because you think you're making pretty good progress in the overworld, and then just all of a sudden just bam, enemy after enemy after enemy.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up on 16-bit RPGs, and so I'm like very used to the random encounter, but I agree with you. I mean, that's one of the things I loved about the Trail series is that it has a bit of that random encounter vibe because you're going into battles and you're doing turn-based things, but you also see at least the primary enemy, and if you want to, you can avoid them. Like, if they see you, they're going to chase you, but it's not like you have to sort of suspend belief in one of these turn-based RPGs where, like Final Fantasy VI, you get a Moogle charm, and then all of a sudden, like, there just aren't enemies anywhere. So this feels like a nice middle of the road.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Yeah, I'm just, I really don't have too much to say about this track. I mean, it just kind of sets out and does what it wants to do, and I feel like it does what it needed to do pretty well.
Yeah, I feel like the Falcom sound team is sort of in their element in tracks like this. All good.
You ready to talk about the next track?
Yeah, for sure.
All right, so we have another track from Trails of Cold Steel 2. This time it's Bring Up Trust, and this track was composed by Toshiharu Okajima. that track that you guys just listened to, that was Bring Up Trust from Trails of Cold Steel 2, and that was composed by Toshiharu Okajima. I definitely get a boss fight kind of vibes from that. I don't know if I'm right about that.
All the games have these like sub mini boss kind of vibes. If I recall correctly, this is one of those where it's like there's like real chapter bosses. There's like kind of these sub bosses. You also do these like you have a lot of fights with like people who are on the other side, and you have mixed feelings about. So there's like each game has like 2 to 4 like battle music type of themes, and this is another one of those from 2.
Yeah, I definitely get a, I wouldn't say dark, but just emotional kind of vibe. And it's mainly because of the violins, which I will say that I was surprised on how overpowering it was. So I don't know, I'm just kind of used to, like, with these kind of tracks where they just have like that rock sound with the violins. I usually think of the violins as just kind of like a supporting instrument, and I feel like this is like the main focus.
Yeah, Falcom definitely has. They do this a lot where the strings play more of a lead. It's all to me. It often feels like the strings are effectively a sub for vocals, and so they have like kind of their own melody line, and it feels like what the if you were to write vocals for it, like what the vocal line might be. But like the Legend of Heroes series, like the Trails in the Sky and other games, like sweeping strings, string leads all the time. Like this is Falcom on a stick right here.
Now that you say that, I could definitely hear that. So I mean, you probably could easily replace the violins with vocals, and I think you would still get the same feeling with this track. But yeah, I totally see that.
And I think that's why for me they don't feel overpowering. They feel like they're bringing a whole new level, and it's like filling out the track more. I mean, again, this track is it's like again sub boss or like further along, and so it's trying to give you like, look, we're in a different level of thing here. We need a different level of energy, and I think the strings bring that.
How often would you hear this track? So, I mean, I feel like I could definitely listen to it like a few times.
You probably hear the sub boss track like a tenth of the time that you would hear, like you'd hear this one like a tenth of the time you'd hear Heated Mind, right? Because uh, typically the games have like 6 or 7 chapters. There's like 2 or 3 like mid boss type things. It's typically when you're hearing it.
Oh, so you're for sure definitely going to be hearing this quite a number of times.
Yeah, a lot of the tracks, again, like a lot of the, I mean, like the games are so big and you do so many things that all of the like locations and all of the like specific little more ambient tracks that are happening because there's a story element, those aren't repeated unless you're sort of going back to those locations and things. But all the battles are like more, either it's your regular battle theme, it's like sub boss, it's like frenemy battle, which we'll get to in a little bit, or it's like mega boss, or it's like, hey, this is the arc of this chapter in Trails of Cold Steel, and this has a whole other level of music.
I guess I have a slightly off topic question for you. Would you say that Trails of Cold Steel 2 is better than the first one, or not as good, or just about on par with the first one?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So I played Trails of Cold Steel 1 on the PS3, and then I literally beat Trails of Cold Steel 1 in the morning, and then literally like took a break for lunch, and then after lunch started Trails of Cold Steel 2. But I started Trails of Cold Steel 2 on the PS4, and the PS4 version is fully voice acted and has high speed mode and a bunch of other things, and so it was like a mind-blowingly better and like excellent experience. But objectively, I think Trails of Cold Steel 2 is better than 1. I think I liked 2 better than 3, and I liked 4 better than 3, but I think Trails of Cold Steel 2 was my favorite experience of the series.
So this is definitely the highlight for the series for you.
It's just like it's sort of like, I think, perfectly done for everything that they set out to do. And again, the the modern, the like re-release, not the PS4 version, is, I mean, the everything is voice acted, and it looks gorgeous, it runs super fast, and like, even, I mean, again, it's hard for me to disconnect objectively from the step up from the PS3 version, which is still, it's great, but the all the bells and whistles are there for two, when you pick it up.
I mean, that sounded like that's a pretty big jump.
Oh yeah. Well, and again, Trails of Cold Steel 2 picks up the second that Trails of Cold Steel 1 ends. Trails of Cold Steel 3 is more of a traditional time has passed, and then 3 to 4 does the same sort of vibe where it's like an immediate transition. And so I wound up liking 2 and 4 better because it felt like you just had so much momentum going into them.
That actually does sound pretty appealing to me. Like if I was to play them back to back, like you have, I mean,
Yeah, it's awesome. I mean, you don't lose skills. You don't lose, like, because like so many games, right? Even if they're truly sequels, you kind of start back at level one. You have to like relearn everything. This one was like, that wouldn't make any sense. Like, Reen wouldn't have forgotten all the things that happened literally 1 second ago. So you just get more abilities, and it just stacks and builds and compounds. And so anyway, that's the piece I liked. And then I think they set that bar very high. So when I went into 3, and it pivots away from that, you're sort of like, yeah, okay. I mean, I'm still into it, but you're not riding the wave the same way.
I actually find that really cool that skill wise and like abilities wise, you pick up where you left off at. So, I mean, I agree with you. With a lot of games that have sequels and stuff, especially if they're like a direct sequel, it doesn't make sense that you got to start back at square one, even though you're supposed to be this awesome character or whoever who has all these abilities and stuff, and they're just like gone.
Right, exactly. And this one is like, it is literally the same story. It is literally the same people, and it is literally the same time. So it would have been just such a hard pivot to like reset everything and everyone.
I'm assuming that it would probably not be a good starting point for anyone that is unfamiliar with the series. Like, if they just jumped in the two instead of playing one, I mean, with that,
I mean, again,
I mean,
because it's literally picking you up in the middle of like effectively a cliffhanger, the way Trails of Cold Steel 1 ends. The games are definitely designed to start at Trails of Cold Steel 1. I did not play the earlier games in the Legends of Heroes and Trails series overall, and you don't need those. Like, you don't have to go back and play Trails in the Sky. You don't have to play the Crossbow arc. There's like little Easter eggs and things and here and there, and later in the series, it all starts to come together in a way that I'm like, oh, it would have been cool to have played those, but you don't need to play them. But there's kind of no reason not to start with 1. And then they did release Trails of Cold Steel 1 on PS4 with the voice acting and everything else, so you have that experience to go through now. And it's on PC and it's on Switch, so.
well, it definitely makes sense to me. I mean, I'm not really the type of person that would just kind of jump into the sequels before playing the original.
Yeah, and the first one's so good that you don't want to miss out on it.
Right, right. Is there any more that you want to say about Trails of Cold Steel 2 or this track?
No, I mean, again, I think 2 really set the stage for what this whole story was going to be, and it started to really unpack a lot more of the depth of the story, the darker elements of the thing. I mean, you definitely are like pivoting away from we're students and figuring out the world to, hey, I think we're intimately involved in all the things that are going on here. So anyway, I highly recommend the series, as everyone obviously knows. 2, again, was my favorite of the games, so can't recommend it enough. And then if we're moving on to the next song, like, if you thought those strings from before were overwhelming, then hold on to your butts, because this track's about to take it to a new level.
Oh man, I can't wait. I mean, I'm about to witness that myself. So we're going to move on to Trails of Cold Steel 3. And the name of the track is Sword of Biting Gale. And that was composed by Mitsuo Singa. That track that you guys just listened to, that was Sword of Biting Gale from the game Trails of Cold Steel 3, and that was composed by Mitsuo Singa. Oh my god, Chris, that track, that was so good.
Yeah, man. I mean, now we're into Trails of Cold Steel 3, and so now your main protagonist, it's I think it's like a little over a year after, and he is now a instructor, and now your like main party is him plus new students, and this track plays during battles where like things got real rough, and there's like something that happens, either like an older character or someone comes along, something, and turns the tides and things start to go your way. So it's not the like default battle theme, but it is like, man, we got like round two and we're feeling good and let's get this thing going.
Yeah, I definitely got kind of a fun vibe out of it. I mean that might not be the right thing to say. There's a certain confidence with this track that I just kind of feel from it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, again, it often plays like when your party feels down and out, and like, you know, a former classmate, a former, a friend that you didn't that hadn't been introduced yet shows up and like distracts the enemy or does like some super move to like delay your inevitable demise. I mean, it definitely has that. You are excited that this is happening. You feel re-energized, and we're gonna push through the end of the battle vibe.
Yeah, I would have never imagined that things were looking bad at that point. So, I mean, I guess I didn't really mention this, on the top of the show, but I'm going into a lot of these tracks just completely blind with no context whatsoever.
Yeah, which I love. I mean, I think you experience them, that way in the game. So I think it's awesome that you're experiencing them that way. Again, when this track hits in the game, it's no longer going badly for you, right? It's like things have turned around and you feel totally validated. You feel a resurgence of energy. And I think, again, the strings and the vibe that they bring totally delivers.
Well, I think that's totally badass.
Yeah, I love this track.
And I mean, I'm kind of a huge sucker for nice, like, wailing guitars and stuff too. So it was just like I mean, I was feeling pretty pumped. I mean,
yeah,
like I said, this was really good.
For. Yeah, and that's the vibe they're going for, 100%.
Oh man, yeah. Is there any more that you want to say about this track?
No, I mean, again, so all the games have a track like this, which is, like they have got the battle theme, you've got the sub boss theme, you've got boss theme, you've got this one, which is sort of like, again, either like a weird thing has happened and you have to fight a frenemy, or like an old rival returns to help you, or a long lost ally shows up. They've all got these types of tracks, and they all deliver on that feeling that you should have at the moment that that's happening.
I think that sounds pretty cool. I didn't realize that the other games, they had moments like that as well.
Yeah, I tried to kind of pick archetypal songs that are sort of like, hey, there's this one in all of the games, there's one like this in all the games. So I trying to give people like a very quick overview of a pretty immense catalog of music and games.
Well, I wonder what you have in store for us for this next track.
Mm-hmm.
So we're playing another track from Trails of Cold Steel 3. This is Spiral of Erebos, and that was composed by Takahiro Unisuga. That track that you just listened to, that was Spiral of Erebos from Trails of Cold Steel 3, and that was composed by Takahiro Unisuga. And I thought that last track was pretty amazing. My god. This one, I think it was even better.
Yeah. this this one is basically like the climax of Trails of Cold Steel 3. You're in this like final dungeon that is a spiral, like that's sort of the shape, and you fight like sets of like, you know, the game's version of ultra bosses. Each time you traverse deeper and deeper into the dungeon, and so this track basically plays the whole time, except when you're fighting some of the bosses. And so even when you're doing the regular enemy battles, if you're in the Grawl of Erebos, this is the only track that plays the whole time.
Yeah, I definitely had a final boss or like end of game type of vibe. So I think in my mind when I was listening to it, I was just getting a either real personal battle against like somebody that your character was close to, or maybe the fate of the universe was at stake. I mean, it definitely sounded pretty serious.
Yeah, I mean, again, avoiding spoilers, but like all those things are happening. And like Trails of Cold Steel 3 real, and like the second half of that game is when, I mean, it's kind of like Harry Potter as it got older, you know, like it got so much darker. This was like, man, we are like not in school anymore. Like there's nothing like juvenile about what's going on, and like it's dark and it's going to end in a dark way.
Man, that sounds like growing up.
Yeah, for sure. And again, I mean that's a little bit of like it's got some of those tropes, right? Because they are, you know, either just graduated high school or just starting off in life, and so it's definitely got that growing and exploring the world vibe to it. But again, 3 is where the actual story of what's going on starts to become clearer, and there's just so many like wow moments and like legitimate moments where, you know, you're like, oh, I did not see that coming.
I guess story wise, with the change in tone. I mean, how did you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, the end of 3, and when the story starts to really take shape, because you're so invested in the characters and there's so many things that happen, you know, to them and to people you know, and you know, there's people that you thought you knew that were good or were bad, but now they're the other. Like all that starts to happen, and so again, 3 wasn't my favorite once it to start, but once it got its sea legs and it picked up momentum, and once it wrapped itself up, I like couldn't have been more ready to get into 4 and to finish the story out.
So it was definitely heading in the right direction for you, and you were just getting more and more invested as it was going on.
Yeah, definitely. And by then, all the new characters, because you basically had spent 2 games with the same characters. 3 introduces you to new characters in your like expanded roster of actual playable characters. And by the end of 3, you know, you feel connected to them because at the beginning they were brand new, and that's why again I feel like 3 was a pivot and a sort of departure from the feeling you got from going from 1 to 2. But by the end, you're invested in all those people. And I mean, look, I don't find myself with like, whoa, I did not see that coming, you really fooled me moments, in particularly in games, and not very often in movies and things. But there were legitimately moments where I was like, no, come on, come on, like, and you think back and you're like, no, like this is really well written. They planted those seeds, but there's just those moments where you're like genuinely surprised and, you know, torn about what's happening.
Well, that's definitely sounding like the writers, they've done a fantastic job, and that they pretty much had you like the edge of your seat like the entire time.
Yeah, definitely. And again, like Trails of Cold Steel is, you know, they just released another sequel to it, but it was, you know, kind of the culmination of the Trails series, which had 5 games before Trails of Cold Steel. And so they had, like, you know, the people in Japan that had played all the games are people like Purnell from Rhythm and Pixels, who's played like every Falcom game ever. Like, you have those people where you've been like setting the stage for like 15 years. So they had a lot to deliver on.
Sounds like they had a huge challenge on their hands, and it sounded like they pulled it off just based off of what you're saying.
Yeah, and again, I think this track and that dungeon is like a great way to wrap 3 and to set you up for 4, which again, 4, as if 3 brought you away from we're students and we're naive about the world into, hey, you're in a grown-up place now and there's serious things happening. 4 was like, no, we're going to get really deep into everything that's going on, and we're going to unpack this thing, and it's dark, and there's a lot going on that you still don't understand. And so, again, I think this was a great setup for that.
I'm thinking that sounded pretty amazing. And
yeah.
Is there anything else that you want to say about Trails of Cold Steel 3?
No. Again, a great setup for 4, which was a fantastic way to end the series.
I think before we get into this last track, which it's going to be our only track from Trails of Cold Steel 4, is there anywhere that my listeners could, follow you on, like, any social media websites, or where can they find you?
I pop up every now and again and infrequently on things like this. I've done a show with Ed. I often call into Ed and the VG Embassy. I often call into XVGM Radio. But I don't have my own show. You can find me on Discord and probably any of those Discord channels. But I am more a consumer and an avid fan rather than a content creator myself.
So you heard it right here, folks. Chris does not want you to follow him anywhere. Just leave him the hell alone. Oh, man. I believe that's going to just about do it for the show. If you guys like what you've been listening to, have your friends check out the show on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, whatever podcatching service that you could think of. I'm more than likely going to be on there. You can email the show at vgmjourney@yahoo.com, and you could also check us out on Twitter at vgmjourney. I also have a Discord server for the show, which, just like Chris, you could talk to your fellow VGM journeymen and talk about games, music, and even look at some cool art. I also have a Patreon for the show, which, if you subscribe to the $3 tier, you'll have access to a monthly Patreon-only bonus show called a VGM Side Quest that I host with my fiancée Carly, and you also get yourself a shout-out at the end of every show, just like the following people: Ed Wilson from the VG Embassy podcast, Scott McElhone, and John Harrington, John Regan, David Fleming, and Jesse Moore of Game That Tune. So thank you guys for your pledges. We're going to play things out with one more track, and this is coming from Trails of Cold Steel 4. This is Mighty Urge. It was composed by Mitsuo Singa. And Chris, before we play that track, what do you have to say about Trails of Cold Steel 4?
I mean, it is an epic end to an amazing set of games and an amazing journey. I mean, it made me go and want to go back and do Trails in the Sky. I can't wait for the Crossbell arc to come west. It was just beautifully done. And this track, I love a good battle theme, so I had to give you the battle theme to send us out.
Well, I'm pretty excited to listen to it, and I'm sure that the listeners, they're going to enjoy the hell out of it too. So I want to say thank you for coming on the show. I mean, this was a pretty great set of tracks, and I hope you had a good time.
Yeah, it was awesome. Thanks for having me. Thanks for letting me gush about Trails of Cold Steel, and hopefully more people will play the games, or at least more people will check out the OSTs, because they're fantastic.
Have a good week, everyone.
It's going to be great.